Hi, everybody. How's it going? This is Eden Mabon of lightcycleastrology.com. Welcome back to the channel, friends. Today, we are taking a look at Mercury entering the sign of Aquarius, which happens tomorrow on Saturday. Now, this is sort of a two-day feature where we've been looking at Mercury having made a conjunction to Pluto at the very end degrees of Capricorn, and apparently going through this pretty big, powerful, transformative moment right before entering a new sign. So today, what I want to do is compare archetypally what Mercury is like in the sign of Aquarius versus the sign of Capricorn. And before we do, I'd like to mention, though, that this channel is funded by my consultation service at lightcycleastrology.com. We are accepting new clients for 2023, so if you're interested in becoming a client, please visit me on lightcycleastrology.com. Okay, let's go ahead and pull up the real-time clock and get into today's video here. So I want to take you back to December the 7th, where we see Mercury entering the sign of Capricorn. Now, if I roll forward by weeks here, we see Mercury travels through Capricorn, and by December the 28th, Mercury begins to actually make a conjunction or moves into the range of adherence to the planet Pluto. So he's just dipping his toe into the plutonium waters, so to speak. Now, you'll notice, though, that there's this little S denoting that Mercury has actually stopped and will not continue to wander into those plutonium waters because he enters retrograde. So normally, Mercury will only spend about 3 weeks in a given sign unless he's going through a retrograde in that sign, which is the case for this last couple of weeks now. So we see, if we go forward, Mercury retrogrades all the way back to January the 18th, and we see there's the station for Mercury to now turn direct. And then if we go forward again to this Wednesday, February the 8th, we see now Mercury is once again making that Pluto contact. So on Wednesday, I did a video on this contact that Mercury is making, because there's a very interesting theme here with Mercury, because normally we see when a planet enters a new sign, there's this natural proclivity for the planet to, shed the ways in which that planet expresses through that sign, and obviously begins to express itself differently as it moves into the next sign. We naturally see that, but one thing that is really powerful is you also notice this contact with Pluto seems to be sending Mercury down into the underworld, where he could be seen to shed those Capricorn kinds of qualities, so to speak. Now, as we roll forward over the next couple of days, we get to Friday today, and there is the perfection of the adherence or conjunction. And then we go one more day forward. There is the moon making a square to Mercury right as he enters the sign of Aquarius. So what I want to do is give a little bit of a comparison about what Mercury is like in the sign of Aquarius compared to Capricorn. And the reason why we're comparing is simply because both Capricorn and Aquarius are Saturn-ruled signs. So it's like, how do we see Mercury filtering through a different lens if he's essentially moving out of a Capricorn sign moving out of a Saturn sign into a Saturn sign? There is a bit of nuance here that we're going to play with today. So, okay, one thing that we will notice is that even though Mercury is traveling into a Saturn-ruled sign from a Saturn-ruled sign, that theme of Saturn and Mercury continues. But what does change is the change in modality, element, and what you could call polarity. So I want to get into some of those, and then we'll give some concrete examples for both Mercury in Capricorn and Mercury in Aquarius, some concrete delineations that you could see. But first, I want to go into a little bit of a philosophical deep dive or rabbit hole, very apropos, I suppose, for this moment where Mercury is making a conjunction to Pluto. You tend to want to maybe dive a little bit deeper into some thoughts that you have. But one thing that you notice right away is that, when you see Mercury entering a sign that is still presided over by the same planet, in this case Saturn, But then we are looking at how does Saturn express specifically in a different way from Capricorn to Aquarius. That's really where we're going to see the kind of quality changing. And one way is that the element is changing between the sign of Capricorn and Aquarius, as I'm sure most of you already know. But I think the fun thing to do here is to really almost like meditate on this change, because it is so nuanced, and it brought me down to a pretty deep dive in like some philosophical realms where I was like, wow, what is the difference here? Well, one thing that is fascinating is Capricorn stands in opposition to the moon's temple, and Aquarius stands in opposition to the sun's temple. But Capricorn is an earth element. When I think of the moon, I think of my body. That's one of the ancient significations for the moon, among others, was this connection to the body. And when I think of the earth element, I also think of my body. So for me, the rabbit hole was this. The moon seems to have a connection to the body, and so does earthly things, because in ancient astrology, that earth element has this connection to the material realm, as does the moon. So they both seem to have this connection to materiality and bodily form. But one thing that threw me for a loop was that the moon, or the temple of the moon, Cancer, stands in opposition to Capricorn. So in one sense, you get the body being as far from itself as possible when the moon is in the sign of Capricorn. So how do you get Capricorn being connected to earthy things that is generally associated with material form and bodies and things like that? But then you also see that the sign is opposed to the natural ruler of the planet that represents the body. Very, very weird. And finally, the breakthrough, I think, happened, in my mind at least, is that the Capricorn sign is connected to Earth, but not the individuating body. So Cancer maybe is getting at that individual body that we all have, whereas Leo is really more connected to that individual soul or spirit that animates the body. So those two signs are next to each other, and that makes sense. So I think one of the comparisons you could make between Capricorn and Aquarius is saying that the temple that is opposite to the temple of the body could be the world's body. And that is why it still retains that earthly element, if you follow me. It's the sign that is associated with the world. It's a sign that's associated with people that control or rule the world, that connection with Saturn controlling the world. The world is built in that material form, and from the world we get our body, from the soil, the minerals, the plants, the animals that we consume, what have you. We are creating a physical body, but it's the spirit that animates the physical body from the viewpoint of ancient astrologers and, of course, many other spiritual traditions. But when you look at Capricorn, are we looking at the collective body of, for instance, the cosmos or the solar system or the world, or on a species level or like an animal level? Are we talking about when you get things like Saturn being in Capricorn associated with slave masters that controlled people that tilled the land? You know, Saturn in Capricorn is archetypally sort of that image of the slave masters that are whipping the slaves that are building the pyramids. You know, it's the collective workforce or labor force that is building the pyramids, and Saturn is sort of dominating or controlling over that force. That's really the essence of Capricorn as an image form. So is Capricorn associated with the furthest thing from an individual body, but something that stands in opposition to that would be more like the collective material body? I think so. Another interesting distinction between Capricorn and Aquarius is going to be the polarity. when we talk about polarity, we're talking about gender in a minor way. So we're saying that Capricorn is supposed to be a quote unquote feminine sign, and Aquarius is supposed to be a masculine sign. But really, I think it was better understood in the ancient world, as I was taught by my teacher, Adam Ellenbaus, that you're going to broaden that. You're not going to make the polarity specifically about man and woman, about gender. That sort of limits what it really is. I think it's more something like you get this connection with Capricorn having a feminine kind of natural connection, which is equal to a nighttime or a yin kind of energy. In Aquarius, you get the quote unquote masculinity of Aquarius sort of being more akin to maybe the daytime or a yang kind of mode. So if you broaden it out, now ancient astrologers did use gender signs to some degree. Like, for instance, if you had a fifth house occupied by a masculine sign like Leo or something, they would have interpreted, well, you're probably more likely to have boys for children than girls. But specifically speaking, they also associated it with things like daytime. So all the masculine signs are associated with daytime. That isn't gender specific. It's more polarity specific within nature, I think. So one way that you could describe a feminine or nocturnal nighttime kind of energy that we see associated with Capricorn is something like that slow developing or internal gestation period. So for instance, Capricorn looked at in that view would be a sign that says, well, the job is to take the fall season and transform it into winter. The same way in which when something is being born, like a female might gestate a baby that's not ready to come out yet, but there needs to be this slow development over time. So the ancients were looking at polarity in terms of kind of like feminine having some connection with gestation on the inner realms, where things were not quite ready to be birthed full on into the external world. That's the difference that you get in Aquarius. So when you think about Mercury changing from Capricorn into Aquarius, one thing that is interesting you could see is our thoughts and ideas, our markets that are connected to commodities, our monies that we save, our communications that we have, are all of those things changing from this more introspective or slowly developing gestational kind of thing into, okay, it's ready to come out into the world. Aquarius is also modally different from Capricorn in the sense that Capricorn will pivot that fall energy and turn it into winter, but it gestates until we get to the middle of winter, where is really the time that the gestational thing is birthed, and we get this connection with a solid or fixed kind of energy. So it's stabilizing that new thing that is emerging. So the winter is stabilized, in other words, in the sign of Aquarius. So not only do you get this connection with things that have gone through gestation, but it's also things that have transformed from one season into another season, metaphorically. So those are some of the interesting ways in which you could see Mercury entering a new sign, changing modalities, changing elements, changing polarity. And you get something like, for instance, if you're thinking about how do you make money, just as a general thing with Mercury, how do I make money? Well, how do I make money in Capricorn is something like, I need to contemplate, meditate. I need to come up with the idea. I may need to rework or change something that I was doing into something new. But by the time Mercury enters Aquarius, maybe those ideas are starting to become stable and a more permanent fixture of the landscape, so to speak. So now I want to give you guys a few hard examples of the differences between Mercury in Capricorn to Mercury in Aquarius that I came up with. So let me go ahead and share my example screen here. And we have a few examples starting out with Mercury in Capricorn. Has this connection to things such as the trade of commodities and services. All right, so Mercury associated with the with merchants. He was a god of merchants and markets. So trade, right? But what is he trading? Well, in Capricorn, he's trading the commodities of the earth. But again, he also has this connection to that feminine or gestational kind of earth-like quality. So it could be this more worldly labor force kind of thing, right? So it's not just commodities. One of the things of the earth is going to be the collective labor of man and women and everybody and all creatures. That sort of Saturn rulership that presides over the collective forces of nature or of peoples. I think that is really getting at what the quality of Mercury through Capricorn is. It's not just the commodities, not just trading the barley and the wheat and the steel and medicines, but also the labor forces, right? So we see labor of the land, that connection to the land, controllers of the world. Yeah, Saturn, having that connection to what is Saturn doing in Capricorn? He's presiding over the feminine body of the world, governance of property, land and society, building from earthly materials. So this is actually an example that was happening to me personally, because during the time that Mercury was going through Capricorn, I was building all kinds of things out of wood, preparing for our family's new addition of a baby. And so to get the house ready, I went into full-on construction mode, which I haven't been in for a long time. But there I was out there ripping and shredding wood like no tomorrow. And I found myself thinking of this list going, oh my gosh, I've been literally building things of earthly elemental nature. Thieves in prisons. Okay, Mercury has this connection to thieves, right? Because Mercury, the temples of Mercury, Gemini and Virgo, stand in opposition to the temples of Jupiter. So Jupiter is sort of the moral authority, and the natural contrary to that is Mercury. So Mercury has this connection with ideas that maybe are bent, like every rule is made to be bent, not broken kind of a philosophy. That's Mercury. Mercury says, well, I don't know, maybe it's okay to steal if it's in certain circumstances. Maybe I can steal from the rich to give to the poor. So you get this connection with maybe thieves or crafty, clever things that are also having this connection to prisons or structures that are permanent and controlling, or establishments within society writ large. So you get prisons, thieves in prisons. You get military budgets and military or military corporations that I'm forgetting some of these examples, but is it like, I probably shouldn't say it because I don't want to get in trouble. But things like military budgets for governments or military budgets for military corporations. Remember that Capricorn is where Mars is said to be exalted and lifted up. So you combine that mercurial connection to money and budgets, and also where militaries are used to control the land. Corporations in general, right? Retirement funds. I was particularly fond of this one because you get Saturn having that connection to things that take a long time, things that take you practice over a lifetime, saving money over a lifetime. You get Social Security, same kind of thing. You also get like the commonwealth. What's the pool, the wealth of the world? That's a real Mercury in Capricorn kind of thing. Taxes, the IRS, property taxes. One that I also like a lot is medicines derived from the earth, because Mercury was the original medicine man. So Mercury has that, he holds that staff that has, I think it's the two snakes that go up the staff. That's his symbol for this connection to medicine. So medicines, but specifically of the earth. Building permits. This one's kind of funny because if you are like me and you live in a Western nation, building permits are very rigid. They're, it's like if you want to install a new toilet paper holder in your bathroom, you might have to go and apply for a building permit. Now, I'm being facetious, obviously, but when I was living in Thailand, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, it was definitely, I'm sure they have like their equivalent of like the building permit department, but it seemed a lot more like people were just able to go out and build something, and there were like conventions on how you do it, but it was like, it was almost like very laissez-faire. If you can build it and it doesn't fall down, good for you. If it falls down, that's your problem. Hopefully nobody gets hurt. But over here in America, where I am a citizen, it is quite strict. So you get that sense of like building permits and building permit offices. Real estate markets, again, that connection with markets and the land, so etc. So that gives us some concrete examples for Mercury in the sign of Capricorn. Now, what changes? All of these things go through a transformational period, that connection to Mercury making the conjunction or adherence to Pluto, that then brings them into stability, but gives them greater flexibility at the same time. This is really interesting because there is so much nuance here. I'm going to try to articulate this as best I can, so hang with me. On the one hand, you get Mercury, first of all, who's a god that is already very flexible. He's about the back and forth, the quick exchange. So we're talking about a flexible symbol that is running through first a sign that is turning things, but is slowly gestating them, and is said to be related to or connected to Earth, which Earth is kind of structurally unchanging. It's pretty solid most of the time. You can change it, but it takes a lot of effort, right? So in one way, you get this flexible god running through Capricorn. It's kind of tied up in that really constrictive structure of the earth. Now Mercury moves into an air elemental sign. So Mercury, I think, likes to be in Aquarius a bit more, because you get Mercury who likes to be flexible in elements, or traveling through an elemental sign that naturally has a greater amount of like things blowing around. Plus Mercury's a god that flies. So you get the sense that there's this connection with both of them that Mercury is going to enjoy a little bit more. But the thing that throws you for a loop is that even though air is kind of has the quality of being more flexible or fluid like Mercury does, this is also the modality of Aquarius is also stabilizing. So we're coming out of this earth constrictive element into a more fluid air element, but into a modality that is more stable. So I have this language where after Mercury goes through this conjunction with Pluto, goes down into the underworld and goes through kind of a transformation, shedding those Capricornian kinds of things, the earth element, the mode element, and maybe the polarity element is being shed in the underworld, metaphorically, obviously. And now Mercury goes into this sign that is somehow more stable, but it's also more flexible. So very nuanced, I think. Okay, now let's jump into examples for what is Mercury like in the sign of Aquarius. So I'm going to take the Capricorn examples and just give an example of how those things could specifically change. One thing to keep in mind as I run through these examples, though, is that Mercury is a pretty fast-moving planet, so it's probably only going to spend about 3 weeks in the sign of Aquarius. So these aren't long-term examples. They're not meant to be long-term examples. They're just meant to give you a little bit of an image to think about. So one thing is, versus when you had Mercury in Capricorn, you had thieves in prison, might transform into something like they're not in prison, but they're maybe in some kind of mental prison. So you get this sense, like, instead of this image of a guy that got busted and now is spending time behind bars, it's maybe somebody that is imprisoned in their mind mentally somehow, like almost like not to get too dark, but almost like a it was not George Orwell, but it was A Brave New World, right? Where people were in society, but everybody had to take pills. Or even I think they did a movie that was sort of a derivative of both Orwell's and Huxley's dystopian kind of concepts of society in the future, called Equilibrium, with Christian Bale. That's actually really good. But in Equilibrium, you're not allowed to see color. You're not allowed to have records or anything that moves you emotionally, because emotions were thought to be something that led to the passions of violence and the downfall of society. So this more controlling mental or air kind of place, as contrasted with maybe more of a structural earthy kind of place, that is something that maybe you could see some transformation with. Okay. We also could have the trade of commodities might be transformed into the trade of intellectual property. Labor of the land, such as farmers, might transform into farmers of solar energy or wind farms. Just to give you a sense of how is Mercury traveling through these elements. Well, if he's traveling through Earth, how does Earth move back and forth? Well, tilling of the land, something like that, changes into maybe more something like farmers, harvesting solar energy or wind energy, making wind farms. Still that connection to labor and labor of the collective, but more somehow airy. Social security might transfer into investments for the future. Aquarius has that connection to the coming spring, looking ahead, where light is steadily increasing day by day, heading towards a new season. And so Aquarius sort of looks back toward the beginning of winter and toward the end of winter. He's kind of in that middle position. And so all of these solid fixed signs tend to look back and look forward in a certain way. They tend to be progressive at the same time that they are regressive. So one of the ways in which you could see maybe some funds that you had in Social Security, you get a bright idea and you think, whoa, maybe I should reinvest in something. So we could see maybe a little bit more of a liberation with the money in this kind of airy way. Okay, and we also see things like property taxes that might be transformed into something like a carbon tax or an internet usage, things more mental or electrical even. And we see the medicine example that we used in Capricorn. Medicines from nature might be thought of as something transformed into something like synthetic psychiatric medicines. So I think that's pretty easy to understand. So that is a few examples that I came up with. Now, I'm sure there are a lot more. I'd love to hear them. If you have any of your own, if you can think of how Mercury transforms between elements, between modes, between polarities, that's the fun, sort of nuanced, and it took me quite a while to meditate on them to get those specific nuanced examples. But if you have any, I'd love to hear them if you want to share them in the comments. But as always, I'll be back again with another astrology video. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate the support and comments that I get day to day. It's really great making these videos and sharing astrology with the world. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Take care, everybody. I'll see you soon. Bye.